I grew up in an ultra-religious environment. I was raised as an Orthodox Jew, and we observed the practices and the traditions to the highest level of severity and strictness. And as I grew older, I began to realize that there were some holes in the theories that were being taught to me, and there were lots of things that were unaddressed. When I was studying in rabbinical school at age 19, we had 3 study sessions daily, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and one in the evening. Each of these study sessions was anywhere between 3 to 4 hours long, where we would be forced to sit and study with a partner and with a group and delve into the various topics that are in the Talmud, along with commentators on the commentators, and many circular discussions for hours on end. Finally, one day I had enough. And so in the middle of the afternoon study session, I got up, left the study hall, and took a walk down the street to Barnes & Noble's, a bookstore. And there I began to read books. And one of the books that caught my eye was a book called God is Not Great by a man named Christopher Hitchens. Now, anyone who's familiar with the atheist movement knows that he is probably the most premier thinker and debater on the subject. And I found his writing to be very compelling. I enjoyed the fact that he mocked the religions, and he mocked the stupidity and the hypocrisy that is found amongst religious circles. He made fun of the superstition and the delusion and the power-hungry religious leaders who simply were just trying to brainwash the masses and keep them dumb and stupid and good followers. I became familiar with the works of Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, and other atheists who use their platforms and their books to speak out against what they call the epidemic of faith amongst the masses, as people persistently followed through with their beliefs without questioning their beliefs, even to the point of their own detriment and causing harm to their lives and to their families and to their children. Now, this resonated with me a lot because I was super familiar with these kinds of religious dogmas and agendas that ultimately were the result of lies. You know, one of the funny yet ridiculously neurotic things that they teach young Orthodox Jewish children is that when they wake up in the morning, their hands are impure, and there is an evil spirit on your hands that came to you during the night. And the only way to purify yourself from this evil spirit is to wash your hands with a special cup for a specific ritualistic number of times. And there's arguments whether it's 6 times or 8 times, and they go in circles with this. But it gets so extreme that they actually suggest that because the evil spirit is so powerful on your hands, the real righteous people should put a cup of water and a bowl next to their bed and wash their hands in this special ritualistic fashion as soon as they wake up, so as to get rid of the evil spirit on their hands. Now, of course, these are all man-made lies. It's the boogeyman in the closet, and it's actually scaring children when they're young, impressionable souls, and it's making them believe all sorts of ridiculous crap. And quite literally, from the time they wake up in the morning, they are bombarded with all of these restrictive notions, all of these false ideas about right and wrong and good and evil and purity and impurity. And it really is highly unfortunate and destructive to the individual. Now, at a certain point of journeying along with this atheistic worldview, I realized that, of course, there is a void that's not being addressed. There is a vacuum that needs to be filled because God is not bound by a book. He's not bound by a religious system. He's not bound by anything. It's purely the notion and the recognition that there is so much beyond us that we don't know. There is quite literally infinity of unknown that spans the universe and beyond that we most certainly cannot rule out. And so the whole concept of atheism actually is a fallacy. It's impossible for a human being to conclude that there is no God, to operate under the premise that there is no deity, there is no God, there is no spiritual realm. It's ultimately a dishonest conclusion because human beings are limited in our capacity to even analyze basic phenomena in front of our eyes, let alone to conclude something about the eternity and the infinity of existence beyond our comprehension and experience and awareness. So, in truth, atheism is not real. And so, once you get to that point, you find yourself in the position of agnosticism. Agnosticism is the claim that I don't know. And now, that's a far more honest place to be in, because it's true. In the world that we're in today, on the surface level, we do not have interactions with supernatural phenomenon. We do not talk to God directly. And so, for someone to say, I don't know whether there is a God, or I don't know whether a certain religious tradition is valid, that's not dishonest. The problem with this mindset is that you are then left in a position of doubt. And you find yourself as a human being on earth, alive, aware, in doubt as to the nature of your very existence, and as to whether there is even a divine realm that's above you, and whether or not there's a plan for you, or whether there is meaning in your life, or there's something behind the veil that you can't see. And frankly, to be in that state of doubt is really unhelpful to the development of an individual, because these are not things that you can live in doubt with. These are the most important questions in all of existence. Who am I? What am I? Why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? Is there a God? Does that God care about me? And what does that God want me to do? These are vital questions that need to be asked, and they also need answers. And so as I began to mature, I started to realize that this mindset of doubt and intellectual honesty, as it's referred to, was really just an avoidance of actually making a decision and really coming to an appreciation of what am I going to do in my life. Often when you talk to atheists and agnostics, they tell you, well, if God exists, let him talk to me. And if he talks to me, then I'll know that he's real. This is not a fair thing to even say. This is not something that a human being can say out of their mouth. Demand that the Lord of all of existence come to your beck and call and answer you when you want it, as you want it. To determine whether God is true or not cannot be on the basis of you demanding that God come and speak to you. So more humility is required in this quest, and more thoughtfulness and care is required when investigating the core concepts and the fundamental nature of what it means to be a human being. Now, there's lots of religions, there's lots of things that have been said over thousands of years by many different people, and lots of people claim that their books are the Word of God. But one of the arguments that atheism makes well is that human beings are susceptible to lies and to brainwash, and there are controlling elements in government and religious systems that capitalize on people's ignorance. And so we can't just believe all the religious books. In fact, there's a lot of contradictions amongst the different religious traditions. So which one is true, if any? It took me some time, but one day I decided to reopen what is called the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. The 5 books of Moses are the foundation of the Bible, of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And it's the beginning. So if you go all the way back to the beginning of these religions, you start from the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And I started to realize whether or not I believe it, I have to read it. I have to know what it says. I've read it since I was a little kid, but it was taught to me through the prism of immaturity and brainwash and lots of indoctrination surrounding rabbinic ideas that are not even in the text. So I started to read it carefully, word for word, as it was written in its original Hebrew, because thank God I'm fluent in biblical Hebrew. And the more that I read it, the more things started to add up. The more I started to see a story of God creating, God commanding, God giving and taking, giving us choice, giving us punishment when we fell short from his demands. And a narrative of truth started to develop surrounding the original history of man and the development of the Jewish people, of which I am a part of. And suddenly I realized that this is no joke. When you read the 5 books of Moses, and it's important to note that believing in the 5 books of Moses does not mean that you believe that the rest of the Old Testament is the direct binding word of God. It does not mean that the New Testament is the direct binding word of God. It does not mean that the Quran is the direct binding word of God. It does not mean that the Talmud is the direct binding word of God. No, it is only the 5 books of Moses. The 5 books of Moses, which is the foundation upon which all of these other sources even exist. That is where the truth lies. And when you start to read that book, reality comes to life in a way that you start to realize, okay, this is not a sugar-coated, fantastical, idiotic view of the world. It's actually a harsh, realistic, and clear representation of what reality is and what life is about, along with commandments on how to behave. And that's really the power of the 5 books of Moses. Not only are the stories and the narratives that are written in there unforgettable stories that everyone in the world knows to some level, it's the laws that provide actual guidance and moral clarity in a world that lacks that entirely. And so when you start to realize just how real the guidance that comes from God directly is, you start to become convinced that the 5 books of Moses may actually be the truth. Now, I'm at the point in my life where I do believe that. I believe that the 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, are the literal word of God. But whether or not you believe that, it's incumbent on everyone to at least know what those books say. Anyone who's a serious thinker, whether it be in philosophy or law or theology or spirituality or history, the work of the 5 books of Moses is a standalone powerhouse of literature that's completely ignored because of how many other texts have been piled on top of it, or because of how science mocks the Torah. But all of that doesn't change the fact that the Torah has been around for thousands of years, and it is absolutely the foundation of our understanding and knowledge of the world. And that's what atheists don't seem to get. They claim that they can reason their way to the moral conclusions that are in the Torah. But the reality is, when I say do not murder, you immediately think the 10 Commandments, because that's the source. The conclusions have already been given to us. And it's an extremely egotistical claim when someone comes along and says, well, actually, out of the recesses of my mind, I can sprout this conclusion, even though the conclusion was already given to you, in which case you already know, do not murder, do not steal. Those are the fundamentals. The 10 Commandments are absolutely the foundation of morality that were revealed to the nation of Israel, along with the other commandments in the 5 books of Moses. And anyone who is seeking truth in their life is obligated to take a look at the 5 books of Moses and read it without any commentary, as it is written, word for word. The book of Deuteronomy is the 5th book in the Bible, and it's the 5th book of the 5 books of Moses. And it is a brilliant recap of the history of the Israelites and their laws and what God commands us and what it means to be a part of his people. And in Deuteronomy chapter 4, Moses, who is narrating Deuteronomy, speaks to the fact that God is the supreme Lord, and he showed that through him taking the Jewish people out of Egypt in a miraculous display, where he made a mockery out of the gods of Egypt, where all of the nations trembled when they saw just how powerful the God of Israel is. And that's something that's so important to recognize, is that never in history has there been a claim that a God came and took a nation out of slavery, made them his people, promised them eternity, and gave them laws that they must follow, and appeared to them en masse as a nation in front of millions of people, appeared and gave over 10 foundations of morality and awareness of existence and worship of God. That's unparalleled. There is no other story like that. And so, therefore, it needs to be taken very seriously and with a lot of weight. And that is the point that's made here in this chapter. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 32. For if you shall ask now, to the days of old, to the first days that were before you, from the day that God created man on earth, from one edge of the heaven to the other edge of the heaven, has there ever been something great like this, or has anything been heard like it? Have a people heard the voice of God speaking from the midst of the fire, as you have heard, and lived? Or has a God tried to come and take for him a nation from the midst of another nation, with signs and wonders and miracles and wars, with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, as all that Yahweh your God did in Egypt to your eyes? No, there is no other story like that. There is no account like that. This is an unique historical event that cements God's memory into our consciousness. The same God that created us from the beginning returned to give a nation a mission that requires the Jewish people, the nation of Israel, to be committed to their God and his decrees. Now here we are called to know that God is the Lord. And that's something that speaks right to the heart of this issue of getting out of that place of doubt. We can't spend eternity in doubt. We can't spend our precious lives saying, oh, is there God? Is there not God? Actually, what the Torah says here is that you need to come to a conclusion. As it says, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 39, and you shall know today, and you shall return to your heart, for Yahweh, he is God. In the heavens above, and upon the earth below, there is no other. And so know it. And that's a process to get to that point of knowledge. But it's possible. It's possible to really know this in this lifetime. And as you increasingly get to know God, you increasingly come to appreciate who he is and how he acts on the world and what he wants from you. And that's exactly the continuation here in verse 40. And you shall guard his decrees and his commandments, which I command you today, so that it shall be good for you and for your children after you, and so that your days shall be lengthened upon the earth, which Yahweh your God gives to you all of the days. And herein is expressed the power of the Torah. Knowledge of God, the one God Yahweh, and how that results in action. Because faith without action is meaningless. Faith just for the sake of mind games and self-pleasure, that's not what faith is. If faith doesn't compel you to take real action in your life and to structure your path in this life, then it's for naught. And that's why faith in Yahweh and his revelation in the 5 books of Moses is so important. Because not only does it connect you to the source of all of existence, but it creates guidance and clarity on how you should proceed in this life. What is considered moral and what is considered immoral? What is considered right and what is considered wrong? How should men behave? How should women behave? What's the role of children? What are we supposed to do as parents? How are we supposed to treat the land? How are we supposed to treat our fellow? How are we supposed to worship God? All of these questions are answered conclusively in the 5 books of Moses. Now that's unbelievable, to have the answers to all of the important questions written out in clear words that have been preserved for thousands of years. That's a beautiful thing, it's a miraculous thing, and it's something that everyone, and especially the people that are part of this nation, the people of Israel, need to return to and need to become aware of what it means to be a servant of God. The blind spot of atheism is the fact that as they mock religion for having blind faith in the Bible, they will then go ahead and have blind faith in their Bible. And their Bible consists of modern scientific theory, of modern discoveries and ideologies. But the reality is that these things are just as questionable as anything else. And the claims that everything is substantiated by evidence, of course, is a claim that's made by scientific institutions that are just as subject to corruption as religious institutions. And so, at the end of the day, we're looking for trustworthy information. We're looking for truth that's beyond the human perception, truth that's not limited by our limitations. Rather, a revelation that's limitless, something that opens us up to the power of God and to the majesty of existence. That is only found in the 5 books of Moses. Now, to read you a beautiful psalm. This is Psalm 93, verse 5. Your testimonies are very trustworthy. This is King David, the writer of the Psalms, talking about the fact that God's testimonies are trustworthy. And now that's so important for anyone who's looking for a real source of information and knowledge. God's testimonies are trustworthy. God's witnesses are trustworthy. And we are so lucky to be the recipients of that grand tradition of this history that's playing out to the very modern day. Your testimonies are very trustworthy. Holiness is befitting of your house. Yahweh is for the length of days. When we think about what's truly long-lasting, when we think about what's truly trustworthy, we have to return to the roots in this fashion and to understand that all of this quote-unquote progress that has been made throughout human history may not be that much progress. We may need to return to the actual foundation of our faith and our understanding of existence, that God created us and that God has commandments that we must follow, and that only through clinging to God will we remain alive and survive to see a better day.